So let's dive in to what I just learned. Schefter tweeted out, Rap Sheet tweeted out, and again, this is a fluid situation, but if the NFL agreed to this, it sure feels like the NFLPA will agree to this as well, that there will not be any preseason games this fall. And it got me thinking. I would imagine many people listening at one point in time in their life, whether it was college or right out of college, did an internship. And I can only speak from my experience. An internship my senior year in college. I've talked a lot about being a GA at Fresno State and obviously working for the Eagles. My senior year at Cal Poly, it's in the Central Coast. I got an internship with the Kansas City Chiefs in like their sales and marketing. And it changed my career. It didn't pay. I got no money during the football season. My dad knew a guy in Kansas City. He rented us a room for like $400 a month or something. And I just helped out with like selling signage. But through that, I kind of got my feet wet by meeting some guys on Herm Edwards' staff. This was in the fall of 2007. Team was terrible. I think Larry Johnson had held out. They had just drafted Dwayne Bowe. And Carl Peterson and Herm Edwards were, the coach and general manager. And I just kind of got me really, really inspired to work in football. And a little bit, I was able to help out the coaching staff. I kind of went to the director of football operations and told him I would do any and everything to help him out. And after my kind of 9 to 5, for, 3 or 4 weeks, I got to just do miscellaneous stupid stuff. But inspired me and helped me kind of change the path of my life and got me involved in college football after that and then in the NFL. It's kind of where it all started. And without that internship, who knows the way my life would have played out. I'm a believer. I'm not that religious of a human being, but I do believe that everything happens for a reason, and that internship changed my life. Sometimes you need to get a foot in the door. Now, these guys that were just drafted, and I'm not talking about first or second round picks. They're, and really third rounders. They're what we call on scholarship. They are not going to be cut, no matter how terrible they are. And every year we see several first rounders have awful first years. And sometimes, and I know a lot of you listening don't get the opportunity to go to training camp. And it depends if, even doing what I do now, I only go to 1 or 2 practices a week. This year I won't be able to go to any because of the virus. But typically if I go to, 5 or 6 Niners practice, and back in the day when I went to Raiders practice, you can get a feel for what young guys are good and what young guys are not. When you're working in the front office, you're watching every single rep they're taking. By about 2 weeks in and a couple preseason games, you got a pretty good idea of if this guy can contribute or if he's got to be a developmental player. But the biggest time for training camp, because a lot of times in the OTAs, you get excited about 5th, 6th, 7th, even undrafted free agents. But by the time, like my first year in the league, I thought some guys were going to be really good, and they didn't even make it through the first week of training camp. You realize that let's wait till a preseason game, or at least the pads come on. And then when the lights come on in a preseason game, when you're playing another opponent and you don't know what's coming, you learn a lot about the guy. And that's an incredible opportunity for late round picks and undrafted free agents to prove their worth to a general manager and most specifically to the head coach, because the head coach is the guy giving you playing time. And if there aren't going to be preseason games, and it sure as hell looks like there's not going to be preseason games, I don't see how the 6th, 7th, and undrafted free agents make the team. Because if I'm running training camp and I don't get any preseason reps, and I understand a lot of coaches these last several years have not even put in their starters. But this year, because there have been no offseason activities, you're going to want to see where these guys are at. You might play a little bit in theory if you had some preseason games. Now you have to use all that energy to the reps in practice. I don't see how an undrafted free agent now gets any consequential reps. I just don't see how it happens in practice. Because if anything, you're giving like a 5th rounder an extra rep. Or you're giving a guy that was on your team last year in a practice squad an extra rep. Or maybe your starter, if it's DeAndre Hopkins and he's new to your team, he's going to want every rep known to man. Or if you have a Nick Bosa and he's trying to take the next step, or Khalil Mack who's trying to get his mojo back, whoever, your starting players are going to want every rep. Peyton Manning was notorious for this. Remember the famous Brock Osweiler gif? He wouldn't let him in a blowout game, let alone practice reps. Tom Brady's the same way. A lot of players, because they didn't have any offseason, their offseason training has kind of probably been hit or miss. It's probably got a little more normal these last couple months where some of these gyms in these different states have been open and these guys have been practicing with their own teammates. But it's different with coaches and your strength staff. So I just don't see how they ever get, where do they get their opportunity? Now, I understand their name and their college film. If you're a fourth or fifth, I get fourth rounders aren't a lock on most years. But I would say they're going to get the benefit of the doubt because as a fourth rounder, you got a little more bonus money. But a guy that I drafted in the 7th round, every year we look up by week 3 or week 4, and you know this as a fan, if you're a fan of the Bengals or the Texans or the Jaguars or the Giants or the Seattle, whoever, you go, God, we got our 5th rounder not only make the team, but he's a starter. And we have an undrafted free agent that rotates on defense. I just don't see how that happens because if you're a coach, you're going to have to feel good about the guy understanding what to do. And all these guys that were on your practice squad last year that have been re-signed to the team and that are going to show up at training camp are going to be so much farther ahead of that guy. And here's something that most people probably don't know. It's kind of, niche football, geeky stuff. That as a vested veteran, which I think is 4 years and more in the NFL, once you make the roster and play week 1 and you're on the roster after week 1, let's say hypothetically you're making $3 million. That salary, if you make the team, let's say you're like a 7th year guy and you're making $4 million a year. Well, if you play week 1, your salary is guaranteed for the rest of the year. It's why a lot of older players during training camp do not make the team because an undrafted free agent or a late round pick, it might not even beat him out, but is just equally as good. So instead of paying the guy $4 million, it allows you to pay another guy $750,000. Hell, whatever the league minimum is, might be like $675,000. And that allows you do that a couple times. I think the average is several, some teams have 4 or 5 undrafted players make the team. I think the average is like almost 2. But every year those guys make the team. And if those guys are going to make the team, that means a veteran player, and I don't just mean like a 12-year guy, it might be a 5th-year guy, gets cut. And training camp in football is unlike the other 2 sports. And in the NBA, when you bring your 15 guys to camp, maybe you have 2 spots. If you're a shitty team, you have 2 or 3 spots. I mean, the Warriors haven't had a spot for like the last 5 years. Most good NBA teams at most have 1. In baseball, maybe a couple spots, and a lot of them are determined by service time. In football, there are legitimately, even really good teams, star-studded, like the Chiefs, probably 4 or 5 spots open. And then bad teams, like teams with new coaches, the New York Giants and Joe Judge, it might be 20 spots up for grabs. So those preseason games, are like a test. You're either gonna get a pass or a fail, and there's the difference between playing like an A or playing like a C might cost you a position on the team, might cost you a roster spot. And the other thing is when I keep an undrafted free agent on the team over that vested veteran that's making millions of dollars, I can cut that undrafted free agent in the middle of the season if he's not any good, and I don't take a financial hit because his contract's not guaranteed. He's not making any money. So it's going to be very, very fascinating. I think we're going to look back on this season in several years and see countless, and I won't really blame the teams if you cut, an undrafted free agent because he didn't get reps in practice and that guy becomes like an 8-year starter or even like a 6th or 7th rounder on some of these good teams. Like it's going to be hard for a 7th round player to make the Kansas City Chiefs, to make the Baltimore Ravens, to make the Seattle Seahawks. And in this scenario. Now, it would be very, very difficult in any scenario, but if I'm a 6th or 7th rounder for the Baltimore Ravens and I go, one of the best rosters in the league, at least I'm going to get reps in practice in a normal season, and then in preseason games, if Lamar and all my starters aren't playing in the 2nd and definitely the 4th game, I might get to play 70, 80 snaps. And who knows? I make a couple plays, all of a sudden John Harbaugh's like, I like this freaking guy. I've liked him since OTAs. I've liked him since early in camp. I'm pounding the table. We're going to keep him. And we're going to keep him over this fringe older player that, will free up some cap space. I don't see that happening now. I talked to someone in the NFL last week who was driving to play golf. He kind of called me to BS. And he was like, you watch this year, coaches are going to be very, very conservative with who they keep, because you're going to want to make sure guys know exactly what they're doing. So older players, and when I say older players, I'm just talking about guys that have been on your practice squad the last 2 years, are going to have such a leg up. Because for the last, at minimum the last year, your coach saw that guy every day. You saw him at practice. The defensive coordinator who uses him for scout team against the starters can swear by him to the head coach, be his effort, the way he's focused, how well he reps stuff in practice. And it's going to have a ripple effect. And you know what? I get it, because this really benefits older players in the NFL. Because, like I said, no sport has more people and more new labor, more cheap labor, gunning for your job at a high-priced job in any industry like the NFL. Because every year there are how many draft picks? There's 7 rounds worth of picks, 10 to 15 undrafted free agents, a team. And every one of those guys are coming for people's jobs. And I just think it diminishes their opportunity greatly. And I get it. From the owners, what I don't think people understand is how little the owners give a shit about, like, when they practice or installation times. They don't care about any. This is all about money. That's all this is about. Like, you think the coaches would want no preseason games? Come on. You're out of your mind. Of course they would. Not just for the starters, but for everyone, just to rep it in this weird time during this virus. But money always, kind of rules the day. And in big business, it should, for the most part. And in this situation, in these weird times, I understand getting rid of the preseason games. But like the internship that changed my life, because I just got an opportunity, a lot of these guys won't be given the opportunities. Now, luckily, if you're an undrafted free agent, it's not like football's going away. If you just show up in practice, you can still make, just somewhat put your best foot forward and attempt to influence individual coaches and show out. Every rep is going to be infinitely more important than it typically is, because there is going to be a very, very limited amount of opportunities just in practice. And now that we know that these preseason games are all but done. What's up, everybody? My name is John Middlekoauff, and I host a show for Colin Cowherd called 3 and Out on his podcast network. You can subscribe to wherever you listen to your podcast. I worked in the NFL as a scout for Andy Reid and Howie Roseman, and I've been talking about football for the last 7 years. If you like your football talk, raw and unfiltered, no BS, I'm your guy. Subscribe to 3 and Out right now.